If you want that contract, you better get down on your knees and beg me for it. Even the president did it. Emily Smith taunted me with those words during our contract renewal meeting, a smug grin plastered across her face. As a department head at our client company, she always looks down on me and treats me like I'm beneath her. But this time, her outrageous remark was so ridiculous that everyone in the room burst out laughing. "That can't possibly be true," I blurted out, unable to stop myself from responding to her absurd claim. "What, you think it's that funny?" Mrs. Smith seemed displeased by my reaction, but little did she know, this would be the beginning of her downfall. My name is Flora Brown, a 46-year-old company employee. I work in sales at a cleaning supplies manufacturer. When people find out where I work, they often ask me, "Oh, so you must love cleaning then?" But that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, I dislike cleaning and find it to be a tedious chore. So why did I choose this company, you ask? Well, to be perfectly honest, it's because I failed miserably at job hunting. After graduating college, I dreamed of becoming an editor at a publishing company. But I got rejected everywhere I applied. Having done little research into other industries and with no other options, I desperately applied to every company that would take me. This place had the best working conditions out of all of them, so here I am. I may have joined the company for lackluster reasons, but once I started working, I developed a more positive attitude. I learned from coworkers that even something as simple as a cleaning product involves all sorts of ingenuity. Gradually, I became more and more invested in my work. Now, I'm truly glad I took this job and I want to continue working here for a long time to come. However, at the moment, I'm being tormented by a certain individual, putting me in a very difficult position. That person is none other than Emily Smith, a 57-year-old department head at one of our client companies. While my company does manufacture and sell its own original products, we also take on manufacturing contracts from other companies. Mrs. Smith's company is one client. They land big projects with major corporations. And my company has been outsourced for part of the project by Mrs. Smith's company, which is the prime contractor, and we are manufacturing the product. In other words, my company is in the position of a subcontractor. The arrangement itself isn't a problem, but the issue is Mrs. Smith's exceedingly high-handed attitude. Subcontractors should shut up and do as the prime contractor says. That's her favorite phrase. Being a subcontractor must be so fun, huh? You really give off that loser at life vibe. We're the prime contractor here, so show some more respect. It's truly unpleasant to deal with. But since they're an important client, I can't just brush her off. I have no choice but to grin and bear it. It would be one thing if her mistreatment were directed only at me, but Mrs. Smith seems to look down on our entire staff. Just the other day, she yelled at an elderly employee who was cleaning near the entrance of the company. "Hey, cleaning grandpa, you're in the way!" Her terrible attitude was too much to bear, and I've been racking my brain trying to figure out what to do about it. Mrs. Smith only became my client a month ago, and we decided to give her a little more time to see how things go, but there's no sign of her behavior improving at all. Moreover, Mrs. Smith and I seem to be connected by a strange twist of fate no matter what. I make it a habit to go for a walk every morning, taking a 30-minute stroll around the neighborhood. There's a park on my route, and about 2 weeks ago, I ran into her there by chance. "Oh, good morning," I greeted her, holding back my feelings of distaste at seeing someone I disliked. But Mrs. Smith's face lit up as if she had found something amusing. "Well, if it isn't Mrs. Brown from the subcontractor. Out for a walk this early in the morning, huh? Good for you. Are you out for a walk too, Mrs. Smith?" Mrs. Smith shook her head. Non. From side to side in an irritating tone of voice. No. I just happened to wake up early today, but I usually sleep in much later. Mornings are for sleeping, and walking in that state is bad for your health, don't you think? I can't understand people who go for walks. Everyone's body is different, and how they spend their mornings is up to them. But did she really have to go that far? Suppressing my frustration. I'm a morning person. I feel good when I get a little exercise early in the morning, I replied. But Mrs. Smith continued her rampage. Oh, that's right. Let me teach you an exercise that's good for your body. It'll help you lose weight better than walking. She started saying this and raised her hands up and moved them around. Doing this helps drain the toxins built up in your hands. It also makes your shoulder joints more flexible. Come on, try it. Mrs. Smith was so insistent that I had no choice but to imitate her. I was wondering if it really had any effect when Mrs. Smith suddenly burst out laughing. Ha. You're really doing it. Even though I just made up this exercise on the spot. Oh, so it was a lie. Mrs. Smith laughed even harder. I can't believe someone would fall for a lie like that. But who knows, maybe it actually works. You should keep doing it just in case. Mrs. Smith got carried away and started doing the exercise herself. I glanced around and saw people out for their morning walks staring at us with looks on their faces like they had encountered something strange. I suddenly felt embarrassed, but Mrs. Smith was completely oblivious. So she kept doing the exercise until she was satisfied. Ah, that was fun. Then said with a fulfilled expression. Phew, my back and hips have been a little sore lately, but now I feel rejuvenated. I'm still young, you know. You need to take care of your health too. Leaving those words behind, she went off somewhere in a good mood. In the end, I was the only one left feeling humiliated. I felt exhausted first thing in the morning and deflated on my own. Moreover, Mrs. Smith started coming to the park whenever she woke up early just to make fun of me. Not every morning, but about once every 3 days. I had no choice but to change my route to avoid running into her. Mrs. Smith must have noticed, because at a recent meeting she scolded me. Hey, I didn't see you yesterday. Why didn't you show up? I just wanted a change of scenery, so I switched up my route. But I kept wondering why she had to be so obsessive. Unaware of my feelings, Mrs. Smith has been escalating her harassment. Specifically, she started spouting off even more ridiculous lies. The fake exercise she made up before was nothing compared to this. Lately, she's been telling lies that directly impact work. I'll reply to this email by tomorrow. But then she won't actually reply until 3 days later. I gently explained to her that it causes problems for me when she misses deadlines, but Mrs. Smith pretended not to know. I said I'd reply in 3 days, didn't I? You must have misheard me. She insisted on this and wouldn't listen to reason at all. Furthermore, just when I thought she had unilaterally sent an email saying she was scaling back the deal. That email was a joke. Did you believe it? She called me up and said, "This kind of thing has happened 5 times in 1 week, and I keep getting jerked around. I wish you would cut it out already," but Mrs. Smith shows no sign of remorse whatsoever. I'm just a whimsical person, you know? I work with passion, so my opinions are bound to change on a dime. What passion? Feeling genuinely angry lately, I decided to come up with a plan. Then the time came to renew the contract with Mrs. Smith's company. Knowing Mrs. Smith, things wouldn't go smoothly with her. I had a bad feeling as I started the contract renewal discussion with Mrs. Smith, and as expected, she started saying outrageous things. If you want the contract, you need to beg me for it. Your president did it too. Our president begged her. Just as I thought she was spouting more nonsense, Mrs. Smith got even more carried away. Your president came to me desperately begging, saying your company is in financial trouble. Since the top did it, you should do it too. She demanded that I beg her. But the next moment, an employee who brought coffee for us and laughed. Haha. Furthermore, the employee who showed Mrs. Smith in was also holding back laughter. Hey, why are these people laughing? Mrs. Brown, properly scold them. Mrs. Smith said that, but I also couldn't help but retort. That's impossible. Our president would never beg Mrs. Smith. Did you really think such an absurd lie would work? Haha. What, you're laughing that much? Mrs. Smith seemed dissatisfied with my reaction, but this is where she rapidly goes downhill. It's true, I'm telling you. Stop laughing and listen to me properly. Mrs. Smith tried to stick to her lie, but I wasn't fooled. I've been working under the president ever since I graduated college. I know very well what kind of person he is. He's not some weak person who would easily apologize profusely. Saying that, I glared at Mrs. Smith. Could you please stop with the lies already? I'm sick and tired of dealing with your so-called passion. You're awfully confident. But this time it's the truth. I even have photographic evidence. Photographic evidence? Could the president have really begged her? Well then, please show me this supposed evidence. What? You're saying that? Mrs. Smith immediately became flustered, so I instantly saw through that it was a lie. If you can't show it, that means it was a lie after all. Isn't it cowardly to drag the president's name into this and pressure me to beg? I thought if I said I had evidence, you would back down. With a completely weakened expression, Mrs. Smith admitted it was a lie, but then she just clammed up with a disgruntled look. Could you at least apologize? The fact that you lied, I think you should properly apologize for that. Huh? I'm the client, you know? Like I'd apologize to a subcontractor. She's like a rebellious child. Why is this person so hard to deal with? Regardless of being a subcontractor, I believe one should apologize when they've done something rude. What's with that attitude? I don't want to be ordered around by a subcontractor. If that's how it is, I won't renew the contract, got it? Even if you struggle financially, not my problem. Mrs. Smith acts tough, but I won't yield. Fortunately, our company is financially stable, so we can manage even if you terminate the contract. How impudent for a mere subcontractor. I wish your company would fall into financial trouble. Wishing misfortune on a business partner, she truly lacks any shred of sincerity. You've been very rude. This could be resolved with a simple "I'm sorry," so please don't drag this out any longer. When I clearly stated that, Mrs. Smith gave a crude apology. I'm sorry. There, we're done now. I know it's pointless to expect more sincere conduct from this person, but this is worse than I imagined. Perhaps my feelings showed on my face, as Mrs. Smith got even angrier. What's with that look? That dissatisfied expression, I don't like it. Excuse me. Please just calm down for now. I tried to appease the heated Mrs. Smith, but it was futile. Being looked down on by a subcontractor, I hate it after all. She shouted this, growing more and more out of control. I was at a loss for what to do when I sensed someone's presence. Quite a commotion. Is something the matter? Perhaps overhearing the ruckus, an old man in a janitor's outfit appeared. It was the person Mrs. Smith previously called the cleaning grandpa. Mrs. Smith seems to assume he's just a janitor and glares at him. "Hey, this has nothing to do with you, Grandpa, so get lost. I'm in the middle of a very important discussion." However, the cleaning grandpa won't back down either. "I'm the president. If it's an important discussion, I should probably listen in." Saying that, he sat down in a nearby chair. "Huh? President? What are you talking about? You're just a janitor, right? Go on, get back to cleaning." As I watched Mrs. Smith rage, I was certain she had committed an enormous blunder. This man is the true president of our company." "That's right. The person Mrs. Smith has been looking down on as the cleaning grandpa is our president, Mr. Williams." "This has happened before. I'm President Williams. Here, my business card." The business card Mr. Williams presented had president written as his title. "What? You're really the president?" "No, but you still might be lying. I'll confirm it on the company website." Not wanting to admit her mistake, Mrs. Smith furiously operated her smartphone, staring at the screen so hard it might bore a hole through it. And her face gradually turned pale. "No way, it's true. The face is the same. You finally believe me? You should at least remember the face of a client's CEO." As I sighed, Mrs. Smith started making excuses. "Well, who would expect a CEO to be dressed like a janitor and cleaning?" "True, people from other companies are surprised. They say I should leave the cleaning to the actual janitors or subordinates." When Mr. Williams said that, Mrs. Smith nodded. "Exactly. You should stop dressing in a misleading way and focus on your real job. Mrs. Smith, don't try to divert attention from your own mistake. Mr. Williams has a reason for cleaning. Our company makes cleaning products, but we don't just make them, we thoroughly test their ease of use and dirt removal. Our cleaning-loving CEO personally cleans the office as part of that testing. A company has various places like bathrooms, rooms, and halls where people walk with shoes on. It's convenient to test different cleaning products all in one place." "Oh, I see. But does the CEO really need to do that? Can't he delegate it to subordinates?" Mrs. Smith seemed to want to dodge responsibility. She wants to argue that she made an understandable mistake, because the CEO was cleaning like a janitor. But that attitude only fueled Mr. Williams' anger. "I don't like sitting still in the CEO's office all day. I think better when I clean." "Then why don't you exercise in your office? You're not young anymore. Moving around too much isn't good for you." Mrs. Smith kept arguing back, but Mr. Williams wouldn't budge. "If the top person takes the lead in cleaning, other employees will start paying more attention to it, too. We handle cleaning products, so our company needs to be spotless." When Mr. Williams spoke with anger seeping into his voice, Mrs. Smith finally shut up. "Well, every company has its own policies, I guess. Why can't you just apologize? Even if it was a misunderstanding, you were rude. You should say sorry. I feel like I keep repeating myself." When I spoke up again, Mr. Williams also frowned. "That's right. Admit your mistake and apologize." "Oh, okay. I'm very sorry." Mrs. Smith finally apologized, but she looked extremely reluctant about it. It must be humiliating for her to lower her head to a company she usually looks down on. But the moment she raised her head, "There, I apologized. Are you happy now? Hurry up and sign the contract." She changed the subject. "She seems convinced we'll renew the contract," but Mr. Williams shook his head. "We will not be renewing our contract with your company. I can't trust employees with no manners." "What? I thought this was leading to signing the contract. Mrs. Smith toppled out of her chair in shock. I gave her a cold stare. On the contrary, why did you think we would give you the contract? You've treated us horribly. I already reported it to upper management. What? You reported it? Wait, this woman, Ms. Brown, is a liar. Don't believe what she says. Wondering how to argue back, this time she called me a liar. She really wants to protect her position at all costs. I'm not lying. Your verbal abuse was so terrible that I recorded it and submitted it as evidence to upper management. Why would you do that? Mrs. Smith flipped over on the floor in surprise, but I had no intention of helping her up. Don't lie on the floor, get up already. Bottom line, your regular conduct is so atrocious I can't trust you. How cold! When your elder falls over, you don't even ask, "Are you okay?" Mrs. Smith thrashed around on the floor. How pathetic for a woman in her 50s to act so childish. You can get up on your own, right? Just go home already. You really don't care about me at all. But I need you to sign the contract. My position will be in jeopardy otherwise. She yelled and tried to sit up. But the next moment, she let out a strange cry and collapsed on the floor again. Are you joking around? It's embarrassing for an adult to act like that. Stand up now. No. My back. Mrs. Smith's face was contorted in pain as she spoke in a strained voice. I thought she might be faking, but she couldn't get up at all. I reluctantly offered a hand, but the moment I moved her back a little. Ow! She let out an agonized scream. This really freaking hurts. Mrs. Smith seemed to be in serious pain, so I guess it was the real deal. I can't get home like this. Call someone from my company. Fine. I don't want you hanging around here anyway. Annoyed, I called Mrs. Smith's company and they said they'd send someone right away. 10 minutes later, the pickup arrived. But when Mrs. Smith saw who it was, she was astonished. The CEO. Ow, it hurts. That's right. The person who came was none other than the CEO of Mrs. Smith's company. His name is Floyd Johnson. Mr. Johnson may be turning 60 this year, but he maintains an impressive physique through daily exercise, appearing at least a decade younger than his actual age. I sincerely apologize for the trouble my employee, Emily, has caused you. Mr. Johnson's remorseful words and demeanor exude a genuine sense of responsibility, showing no signs of waning with age. Unbelievable. Lying on the floor at a client's office, unable to move? How embarrassing. As Mr. Johnson lets out a sigh. My back suddenly started hurting. But more importantly, why is the CEO here? Mrs. Smith nervously responds. I was planning to take a short walk during my break. As I was about to leave the office, I noticed an employee looking extremely tired. When I asked what was wrong, they informed me that you had made a blunder and needed someone to come get you. So that's why you came, Mr. President. You could have just sent an employee instead. Mrs. Smith's face turns beet red from embarrassment, prompting an angry expression from Mr. Johnson. We're currently handling several major projects, and our employees are exhausted. I didn't want to burden them with any additional tasks, so I decided to come myself. Do you have a problem with that? No, not at all. It's an honor to have the president personally come to pick me up. Mrs. Smith quickly corrects herself, realizing her mistake. Judging by the beads of sweat forming on her forehead, it's clear that she knows better than to defy her boss. No need for unnecessary comments. Let's head back to the office. By the way, what happened with the contract renewal with this company? I assume it went smoothly? The moment Mr. Johnson asks this question, the atmosphere in the room grows even heavier. Mrs. Smith trembles as she responds. You're asking about that right now. Well, you see, there were some terms we couldn't quite agree on this time, but I'm sure we can adjust them and have the contract renewed soon. That's not true. We have no intention of renewing the contract due to Mrs. Smith's poor attitude. I interject without hesitation, causing Mrs. Smith's face to turn ghostly pale. What is this woman talking about? She's spouting nonsense. The only one spouting nonsense is you, Mrs. Smith. I immediately refute her claims and proceed to recount the entire truth. Halfway through, this woman is a liar. I had an honest discussion about renewing the contract. Mrs. Smith interrupts. Silence, said Mr. Johnson with a laugh. Mr. Johnson's stern command allows me to finish speaking uninterrupted, but with each word, Mrs. Smith's complexion grows increasingly pallid. By the time it's finished, it's over. It's all over. She weakly collapses on the floor, muttering. However, this does little to quell Mr. Johnson's anger. I specifically told you to secure this contract no matter what. It's an extremely important deal for our company. Is that so? I'm deeply sorry. Mrs. Smith somehow manages to lift herself up, getting on all fours to bow her head apologetically. The sight is so ridiculous that I have to stifle a laugh, but now is not the time for amusement. What do you mean, is that so? You didn't even know it was an important deal? Even though it's your responsibility? As I press her further, Mrs. Smith freezes, clearly flustered. Well, I guess I wasn't really listening. No, I clearly explained it to you. Their products are of excellent quality, and we've been greatly benefiting from them. I even mentioned wanting to expand our business with them in the future. I specifically warned you to avoid damaging our relationship, so how did it come to the point of nearly losing the contract? Mr. Johnson glares at Mrs. Smith with a demonic expression, seething with rage. Honestly, your tardiness and unexcused absences have been increasing lately. Your work is full of mistakes, and I've already warned you about the possibility of demotion. And now, you've gone and angered a client. Consider your demotion confirmed. Be prepared. No, please. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Mrs. Smith desperately apologizes, maintaining her humiliating position on all fours. Ah, my back! She suddenly cried out, collapsing on the floor. She laid there, face down and motionless, only able to mutter, "My back. I can't take it anymore." It can't be helped. We'll continue this lecture another time. Mr. Johnson helped Mrs. Smith to her feet and apologized to us once more. I'm terribly sorry for the unsightly display. I'll make sure to assign a more competent employee to handle this matter. Please allow us to have a proper discussion at a later date. I understand. It will depend on the new representative's attitude, but... As I respond, Mr. Johnson apologizes one more time before leaving with Mrs. Smith. The following day, Mrs. Smith returns with a new representative and Mr. Johnson. Apparently, the cause of her back pain is similar to a pulled muscle. They said it's called a strained back. Oh, the pain is still excruciating. I feel like I'm going to lose it. Based on Mrs. Smith's groans, it was evident that she was in considerable pain. However, Mr. Johnson had instructed her to apologize immediately for her inexcusable behavior. Once again, I am truly, deeply sorry. As she apologized profusely, Mrs. Smith's face turned pale, and she appeared on the verge of collapse. As the president, I must also apologize. Mrs. Smith will be terminated. Mr. Johnson conveyed this news with a regretful expression. If she were fired, she would no longer be involved with our company in the future. From our perspective, it was a perfectly appropriate punishment, but I was slightly surprised. Mrs. Smith holds the position of department head, and I heard she had quite an impressive track record when she was younger. Firing her is a rather bold decision. No matter how impressive her past achievements may be, she is currently a burden to the company. That's how poor her recent work attitude has been. It was also discovered that she had been harassing her subordinates, so I believe termination is justified. Mr. Johnson stated this without hesitation. I was relieved to have a president who could administer proper punishment. Oh, what am I going to do about my life now? It'll be tough to find a new job at this age. Mrs. Smith was emitting an aura of misfortune, but that was none of my concern. Mr. Johnson and the new representative also apologized together, and after that, the discussion proceeded smoothly. They offered to expand their business with us on a much larger scale than before, and the new representative was polite and reasonable. So, I decided to renew the contract and said, "I look forward to working with you in the future." Just when I thought the matter was settled, Mrs. Smith caused another commotion as she was leaving. Still on all fours, she clung to me weakly. "Actually, I have some debts. It'll be terrible if I'm fired, so could you please persuade Mr. Johnson? If you, as our client, say you forgive me, I'm sure the president will have a change of heart." I wondered what she was trying to say at this point, but it turned out to be a plea for help. "No, I don't think I'll help you in this situation. Besides, is it true that you have debts? Aren't you lying because you want me to help you? Don't look at me with such suspicion. It's true that I have debts." Mrs. Smith had tears in her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to believe her. "You've lied to me numerous times before. I can't trust you so easily. Even if your debts are real, I won't provide any assistance. You're so cold. Like a block of ice. Could you be some kind of snow-controlling demon?" Due to things not going her way, Mrs. Smith started spouting nonsense and insulting me. Feeling fed up, I decided to directly retort. "What kind of nonsense are you saying? Enough already!" My sudden outburst caused Mrs. Smith to cower in fear, but I couldn't care less. "You've been constantly lying to me, haven't you? I can't sincerely believe anything you say. I don't know what kind of achievements you had in the past, but to me, you're nothing more than a troublesome, lying client." "You're going that far." Mrs. Smith was crestfallen and started crying, but I continued nonetheless. "Before blaming others, take a good look at your own actions. You're simply reaping what you've sown." "I am sorry." "Well then, goodbye." My words seemed to be the final blow, and Mrs. Smith left with an awkward gait, enduring her pain. Later, I received word from Mr. Johnson that Mrs. Smith had been officially fired, bringing me a sense of relief. From then on, peace returned to my life. I don't know what Mrs. Smith is doing now, but there are various rumors circulating about her working part-time at a restaurant or a bookstore. Putting together everyone's stories, it seems she's working at multiple establishments. Moreover, a colleague who recently visited the bookstore told me she had bandages wrapped around her arm. Apparently, she fell and got injured while carrying books. She looked like she was in terrible pain. So, it appears her hardships are far from over. Losing a full-time job and suffering continuous injuries must make it difficult to pay for medical expenses. Still, I couldn't help but think she brought it upon herself. As for me, I'm still working at the same company. Thanks to Mr. Johnson's company expanding their business with us, our performance is steadily growing. Mr. Williams is as lively as ever, diligently handling the company's cleaning. Although the incident with Mrs. Smith was truly challenging, I'm glad we managed to overcome it. I learned the importance of living honestly without lying, and that even odd individuals can teach us something. As I continue to value sincerity in my daily life, I am working hard today as well.